right, folks. So today, Dr. Ronald Williams Jr. will be speaking on Kaulana Na Pua, claiming space on the historical landscape for past Po'ealoha Aina of Honolulu. Dr. Williams Jr. holds a doctorate in history with a specialization in Hawaii and native language resources. He is a former faculty member of the Kamakaku'okalani Center for Hawaiian Studies at UH Manoa and is currently working as an archivist at the Hawaii State Archives. He has published in a wide variety of academic and public history venues, including the Oxford Encyclopedia of Religion in America, the Hawaiian Journal of History, and Hanoho Magazine. He serves as the current president of the 126-year-old Hawaiian Historical Society and as Ho'opa'aku'auhau historian for Ka'ahuhui, Hawaii Aloha Aina. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ronald Williams, Jr.
Aloha mai kākou. O Ron, yeah. O Ron Williams Jr. ko inoa piha. A ole he kumu wau I ke kulanui o University of Hawaii ma manoa. This is where I usually say I'm a teacher at the University of Hawaii, but I'm not anymore. I have to remind myself. So I did teach at the Center for Hawaiian Studies for 10 years. I served as the founding director of the Lahui Hawaii Research Center for 1 year. Now I'm at the State Archives, pretending to be an archivist, and pretending to know what I'm doing, but really just doing more research and investigating and helping out as I can. Today, first of all, I want to thank the Palace and the Hawaiian Museums Association, and Iolani in particular, for inviting me to be here. These talks, not only on history, but on the kind of interweave this idea of history and historiography, or the process of the creation of history, are very important to me. It's kind of why I do what I do. And that is to address past problems with the historiography of Hawaii and offer solutions. It's easy to criticize, but what can we do moving forward? So today we're going to talk about historiography for a little bit, how we've gotten to where we are with this kind of faulty process, and we're not going to blame folks. I'm going to pick out some museums and archives and so forth and kind of pick on them for a few minutes, even my own. I'm the president of the Hawaiian Historical Society, and we're as guilty as anyone. But I'm doing it not to lay blame, but to get us all to understand exactly where we stand as far as Hawaiian history goes, so that we can start to fix the problem, and fix the problem in a holistic way, not for any one people, but for the people of Hawaii and the world. Okay? So at the top of the presentation today, I have what is the past and present kuleana of institutional preservers of Hawaii's past, right? What is our kuleana? What is our responsibility for the past? And then what can we do today? That's what we're going to talk about. So again, I'm going to talk about historiography for a little bit. I'll give you some examples about how we got to where we are. We'll talk about some present day folks who have kind of fallen through the cracks that we might want to talk about and kind of start to platform. This is what I do in my work and many others do. Noinoi Silva, Noelani Arista, many of us are doing this work to kind of platform Native Hawaiian voice, right? We can all take part in that by telling those stories again, passing those stories around. I'm a big believer in handouts, so kalamai ya'u to the trees, but I'm going to give you some handouts to take home so you'll have something to take home with you to kind of leave with at least a couple of stories. These are very brief and partial bios of people that I've been working on lately that some of us know, many of us might not. So I've got two that I'm going to hand out in just a second. A third is kind of one that's dear to my heart, and that is of the Honorable William Punohu Aveoveo Ulu'ukalani White. So raise your hand if you've heard of William Punohu White. So there's three, okay, four. William Punohu White was one of the most important and one of the most affecting Kanaka Maoli of the 19th century. He was a senator from Lahaina, Maui. His lineage comes back from royalty through Molokai. Kaiakea was his great-grandfather from Molokai. He was the grandson of the first haole to settle in Lahaina in 1797, a man named John White from England. He became a lawyer. He worked as the representative from Lahaina in the legislature. He became a close confidant of the Queen. He was also a confidant of Kalakaua. He was in Halinaua and so forth. He helped write the Queen's Constitution. So when we talk about the 1893 proposed Constitution, he was one of the three main authors, along with Samuel Nolan and Joseph Navahi. The morning of January 14th, 1893, after proroguing in the legislature, before announcing the new Constitution, the Queen met with Joseph Navahi and William White in the Blue Room of the Palace and knighted them with the highest award in the kingdom, the Knight's Order of Kalakaua, the last two awards ever given out under Hawaiian royalty. And so that was on January 14th. So he received the Knight's Order of Kalakaua, yet many of us have no idea who he was. I was blessed to meet with some of his descendants, and over the past few years, we've kind of told his story, also gotten a headstone for his grave, which was unmarked. So now out at Kaulana Cemetery, he's got a beautiful headstone with the proper markings and so forth on it. So stories like that are ones that are the Thomas Jeffersons, the Abraham Lincolns, the George Washingtons of Hawaii that none of us know. So again, I'll tell you why, and I'll ask you to kind of pass on these stories. So I'm going to go ahead now and pass out the two that we're going to talk about tonight. I'm going to start those this way, and maybe you can start those this way. There's two ladies that we're going to talk about tonight. A very under-researched, undertold story is of Kanaka Uivi Po'e Aloha Aina Wahine, right? Women patriots. Some reasons I'll get into in a minute, but tonight we're going to focus on two very important women in 19th century Hawaiian history, Abigail Ku'aihalani Campbell, yeah, and Kahaliwai Cummins, yeah, Mrs. Cummins. They were the president and vice president of Hui Aloha Aina for Women. Again, unquestionably, the most organized, the largest, the most effective political group ever organized in the islands. This was the women's group, had 11,000 members, yet today many of us don't know their stories. So this is the kind of information we're going to talk about. So I'm going to pass those out. I'm going to leave these here for those who want them for the William White story. I have versions in English and versions in Hawaiian. I actually recommend and hope you'll take one of each. For those of you who are fluent, great. If you don't speak a word of Hawaiian, this gives you a chance to compare, right? Learn a couple of words. So you can grab an English and a Hawaiian version. Okay? Okay, so let's get started. And I hope you'll develop some questions. That's kind of my favorite part. It lets me kind of understand what you're interested in, kind of gear stuff towards you. So when we're done, we'll go through some questions, and hopefully I can answer them as best as I can. So, Kaulana Na Pua, claiming space on the historical landscape for past Aloha Aina Honolulu. This is kind of a series that I've been working on for different places. I did this out in Hilo. I did it in Waimanalo. We're going to do it in Waianae on the 6th of May. And it's just kind of taking the patriots of that area and saying, hey, here's your heroes to talk to your kids about, to bring to your second and third grade teachers and say, hey, teach our kids about these. Yeah? So I thought I'd do that for Honolulu, even though these women were not born in Honolulu, they lived much of their lives and their political action took place here in Honolulu. Okay, so we'll talk about that. Okay, so historiography in Hawaii. First of all, what's historiography? Very easy definition. Historiography is the process of the creation of history. It's not history, it's the process. So this is a history book. How did this person get this information? Who did they talk to? Who did they not talk to? Every history that's ever been written is exclusionary. Now that sounds awful, but it has to be. You cannot talk to everyone. If you're writing a book, a history of World War II, you're going to go talk to 20 million people? No. You're going to choose, right? And sometimes those choices are purposeful, sometimes they're just, you only have so much time. So in your history, did you talk mostly to older folks and not younger? Mostly men and not women? Mostly Native Americans and not these folks, or white folks and not these folks, and so forth? That all makes up your historiography. Okay? So historiography is that process. The process of the creation of history in Hawaii has been flawed for over 100 years. I call it the 6%. Approximately 95% of the published materials about Hawaii and Hawaiians comes from English language sources. 95%. And that's a low estimate, I bet. If you go into the library and you pull up histories of Hawaii, and you have 100 books, at least 95 of those are going to be sourced only from English language sources. Now, does that mean it's all lies? No. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying you've got one part of the story. Hawaiians wrote prolifically, yeah? 100,000 pages of Hawaiian language newspapers, tens of thousands of government documents in Hawaiian, correspondences, legal documents, everything. But we haven't read those. So we've gotten the story from the ship captains, the missionary sons, and so forth. Again, not that that's wrong, but it's a tiny view. It's as if we saw a murder and there were 10 witnesses, and we went and took one person and pulled them aside and took the story and then wrote the report. There's 9 other witnesses, right? Hawaiians witnessed and took part in Hawaiian history, and they wrote about it. But we haven't listened to them yet until recently. So that's been one of our big problems. The 6% comes from Helen Chapin, who wrote quite a bit about Hawaiian newspapers and so forth, and she wrote that about 6% of the population was English-speaking at the time, or only English-speaking at the time of the overthrow. So you're talking about 94% of the voice that's elided. And not just Hawaiians. Chinese voice, Japanese voice, Portuguese voice, and so forth. Filipino voice. We have no idea, I say we, I'm including myself, we have no idea what the Chinese were doing around the Wilcox Rebellion. We have suppositions. I can tell you from all of my work, you know, I find notes. There was a spy report note about the Chinese were hiding guns and weapons on the plantation for Hawaiians to try to bring back the Queen. Why? Because the 1887 Constitution took the vote away from them. Chinese, Japanese had suffrage since 1854, but the 1887 Constitution took it away. So but that's all I know. Who did it? When did they do it? All of that stuff we don't know, but it's probably in the papers, it's in correspondence and so forth. All of that stuff we need to start fishing out and listening to. Yeah? So the 6%. The illusion of native voice has produced an exclusionary history about Hawaiians that lacks Hawaiian thought and action. Dr. Noe Silva, my mentor, and when she was on my dissertation committee, she was kind of, not the first, but she was the big voice that came out and said, wait a minute. I was told all my life Hawaiians didn't fight back. Well, they did. I just found this petition with 21,000 names on it and so forth. And that kind of woke us all up. Wow. And so I've been teaching Hawaiian studies for 10 or 15 years, and I've seen my students change over that decade. Now they come in and they know their kupuna fought back. Now they come in and know their kupuna took action. But what action? And where? And how much? And who were the people? All of that stuff we're learning about from lots and lots of researchers. And it's really exciting. I want to give you one example. Now, in my work over the last 10 years, I promise you, I've got hundreds of these. This is one example, because we only have, I don't want to keep you here all night. The death of Na Moolelo. I was a cultural resource affiliate for Bishop Museum for a long time, and I worked on their website. I wrote their website called Hawaii Alive. It's a DOE website. They got a big federal grant to create curriculum for the Department of Education. And so we went in and said, let's use Hawaiian voice. And we went in and pulled 40 treasures from the museum and did research and wrote essays around those treasures to talk about certain topics. Na Moolelo was one of the main ones. We talked about her pa'u and her union with her brother and so forth. Well, she gives birth September 27th, I believe, 1836. A son is born, dies almost immediately after a few hours. She dies 3 months later on December 30th, 1836, from complications from birth. Her brother, Kauikeoli, brings her body back to Haleʻoluhe, which is right down the street here where Queen's Hospital is now, so in that area. So her brother brings her body back to Haleʻoluhe and doesn't want to part with her. And so the newspapers write in every day, like, is he going to bury her? When's he going to bury her? What's he doing? And so forth. She dies December 30th. He doesn't bury her. He buries her finally at Moku'ula in Lahaina in April. But during the interim, he has a funeral for her. She ends up having 2 funerals. But she has a funeral here in Honolulu. So you're talking about an incredibly important history event in Hawaii. The funeral of, other than her mother, probably the highest-ranking wahine, highest-ranking person in Hawaii, a god, a deity. So Na Moolelo funeral is on February 4th, 1837. Now, if I'm a researcher that doesn't speak Hawaiian, and I'm doing Hawaiian history, and I want to go and research her funeral, I want to write about her funeral. Well, great, there's a newspaper that has her funeral, the Sandwich Island Gazette. Sandwich Island Gazette, February 11th, 1837, has the funeral order. Awesome. So I pull this up, this is from the actual newspaper, and I see that the front of the funeral was the missionaries. The missionaries were leading the funeral of Na Moolelo. Behind them was the surgeons, behind them was a band of music, behind them was 2 black banners. Wow. People have written entire dissertations about who was sitting next to the king, who was second over from the king at this thing, who was over here, positioning to the authority and so forth, right? That's an incredibly important fact. So I write this dissertation, and I write this book about as early as 1837, the missionaries had so much influence, they were leading the funeral of the second highest ranking woman in the kingdom. And I publish, and people read it, and they go, wow. And they start to put that into context about missionary relationships with Hawaiians and so forth. If I'm a researcher who speaks Hawaiian, I pull up the English and I say, wow, that's interesting. And then I go look in the Hawaiian paper, and I find that Kekumu has her funeral also. Kekumu Hawaii, no Kaho'olewa Ana, her funeral, February 11th, 1837 issue. But they have leading the funeral, o Kekahi Poi Koa Mamua. Hawaiian warriors are leading the funeral. They have Ona Kahuna Lapa Ao Mai, Hawaiian priests. Very important, Hawaiian priests. Third, Ona Missionary Mai. Right? I've got a different story now. Which one is true? As a historian, I can't tell you. I wasn't there. But I can tell you that there are different conflicting opinions, and I can start to contextualize those opinions. I'll tell you, Kekumu was published by Reverend Reuben Tinker, who presided over the funeral of Na Moolelo. So he was the man who was there at the funeral doing the funeral. So that gives us a little more context, right? But now I write a paper and I say, the pastor who presided over the funeral of Nahiena says that Hawaiian warriors led the funeral, followed by Hawaiian priests, followed by the missionaries. And then I put an asterisk and I say, there is an account in the English language paper that says it was led by missionaries. That gives my readers, that gives academics, that gives us all a different understanding of that funeral. If I don't read Hawaiian, I don't access the Hawaiian language sources, we're just telling that other story, and it's accepted. Yeah. I wrote my MA thesis on a church fire in Lahaina, Waine'e Church, the church of Keopuolani. My first job in Hawaii was working for Akoni Akana, my first kumu. He was the man who founded the Friends of Moku'ula, the attempt to bring back the sacred island of Moku'ula. Everybody I knew, every resource I ever found talks about the funeral, the church being burned down by royalists who were angry because the pastor was pro-annexation. So in my undergraduate, go get 'em, and my training in college all my life that Christianity was a bad thing and it had brainwashed Hawaiians and so forth, I came in ready to show how they had done this awesome thing. Hawaiians had burned the church down. And I went to Noinoi Silva, and to her great credit, I was a sophomore in college, and she's the person to talk to. So I went and talked to her, and she said, I don't think it's true. She said, it doesn't make sense. Hawaiians would have withheld their ho'okupu, their offerings. They would have changed churches. They wouldn't have burned the church down. I said, no, kumu, it's in 10 different books. They all agree. It's right there. She says, no. Do me a favor. Go back and find out where that story came from, and then look in the Hawaiian language newspapers. And to be brutally honest, I thought, oh, she's got an agenda. She's a political scientist. She's angry, It's right there in 10 different books. And I went back and I did the research, and I found out that every single book was referencing the same single source. And I learned a great lesson. And that was, you go in the library, you have 500 books that agree. It doesn't mean anything if they're all agreeing on the same one fact, right? What had happened was, and I go back and I look in the Hawaiian language newspapers, one English language document written, it was a letter 2 years after the fire, written by Reverend Sereno Bishop, that was done at the dedication of the new church. That was found by a company called Community Planning Incorporated. They were hired by the Board of Supervisors of Lahaina to write an official history of Lahaina in 1961. They wanted to mark off important places and also kind of promote tourism. So Community Planning Incorporated from Oahu came over. No one on the staff spoke Hawaiian, so they go through the entire Windley papers, the church papers, they go through everything, thousands and thousands of pages. I went through their entire collection in my master's thesis. One letter from Sereno Bishop 2 years after the fire saying it was royalists who were angry at the pastor. That went into the report, that went into the Board of Supervisors report, that went into the Maui Historical Society book, that went into the Lahaina Restoration Foundation papers, that went into everything. Go back to the Hawaiian language newspapers and look. 17 different accounts in the week after the fire talking about an accidental fire that was started by the church sexton June 28, 1894, because he was preparing for 4th of July celebrations, and he was burning trash in the side yard. And a spark went up and landed on the thatch roof of the church. Nobody was around. The sheriff comes 5 minutes after the fire. The judge, Kaho'olelio, who lives in Lahaina, writes a letter watching the church burn down to the ground. And he says, this accidental rubbish fire hurt us all. It's all right there. But you don't access that if you don't speak Hawaiian. You miss it. And you say, here's the story. That type of stuff happens again and again and again. So this is the Nahiena. So what is the past kuleana of institutional preservers of Hawaii's past? This is all us. Bernays Pauahi Bishop Museum, Hawaiian Historical Society, Board of Education, Hawaiian Mission Houses, Iolani Palace, Kamehameha V Judiciary Center, Honolulu Museum of Art, University of Hawaii. We're all guilty. That doesn't mean we're bad. We often do the best we can. It means we have to look back at our past, find out what we've done, and try to fix it, try to correct it, right? That doesn't mean we're being activists. It means we're being historians. I had a couple of arguments when I was working on the website at Bishop Museum, the Hawaii Live website, a couple of arguments with the trustees and about content. And so, why do we have to talk about that? And I said, because it's history. Well, we don't get involved in politics. It's not politics. Something happened, so let's put out the information, right? So that's what we need to do, is look at what we're doing as taking our jobs seriously, as academics, as curators, as archivists, and so forth. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples. And as I mentioned, I'm the current president of the Hawaiian Historical Society. I'm going to pick on us, just to show you I'm not out to get everyone else. We'll start with the Board of Education. Some of you have seen this in other talks I've done, but it's one of the most kind of affecting for me. William DeWitt Alexander, Board of Education president in Hawaii in the 1890s, he publishes a little report about the revolution in Hawaii the days after the overthrow. And it comes out for sale. They're trying to get their narrative out there. And it comes out for sale. The advertisements are in the Pacific Commercial Advertiser. And it says, accurate, impartial, history of the revolution. And it goes on to cite and quote from Dole and Thurston and Cooper and all of the gentlemen, nobody from the Queen's side. That report was later made into a larger book in 1899 that becomes this, A Brief History of the Hawaiian People by W.D. Alexander. I try not to throw too much opinion on stuff. It's a difficult book to read. It's filled with racist accusations about Hawaiians are not fit to rule, they're barely human, they've just been civilized and so forth. The problem I have with that as a historian is go back and read what they wrote for the last 100 years. 1863, the ABC-FM in Boston declares Hawaii a Christian nation and says they are Christian people, they are advanced, they are civilized, and they can run their own country. Remember, these are Congregationalists. They're not about centralized power. They said, what are you doing? This should be a native-run, native-led church and nation. Boston says this. We know that Hawaii is one of the most advanced progressive nations in the world by the 1900s, right? Electricity at Iolani Palace before the White House. 1854, universal manhood suffrage in the Constitution. 1854. If you were Chinese, if you were Japanese, if you were an African slave or escaped from America, you could come to Hawaii and vote and own property and be a citizen. That's 1854. That's 10 years before the Civil War in America. Americans are fighting about whether or not to own black people. And in Hawaii, you could be a citizen. You could vote. That's progressive. We had the pushing by Hui Kala'aina pushed women's suffrage in 1890. Yeah? Wouldn't happen until 1921 under American rule. So we have an incredibly progressive modern nation that now, all of a sudden, they're saying, oh, these people can't rule, they're not competent, and so forth. One particularly egregious part I'm going to read to you, and that is from his explanation of infanticide. Infanticide is the killing of your own children. It had been a rumor and a myth in Hawaii for many years. Dr. David Stannard wrote a book called The Myth of Infanticide and kind of debunked the myth. Not to say it wasn't a case of it, but saying that it didn't happen as a thing in Hawaii. But yet, in 1898, W.D. Alexander writes about infanticide. He says, infanticide was fearfully prevalent, and there were few of the older women at the date of the abolition of idolatry who had not been guilty of it. It was the opinion of those best informed that 2/3 of all the children born in Hawaii were destroyed in infancy by their parents. They were generally buried alive, in many cases in the very houses occupied by their unnatural parents. The principal reason given for it was laziness, unwillingness to take the trouble of rearing children. So William DeWitt Alexander, president of the Board of Education, says 2/3 of Hawaiian kids were buried alive in their yards because their parents were too lazy to raise kids. Now we know that's ridiculous, right? We know that's crazy. Yes, sir?
Why does he say in the beginning, introduction or preface, does he say why he's writing that book?
Well, I'm not saying this. So we know that's ridiculous, right? The reason why it's important, I'm not trying to get you to hate anybody. He's been dead 200 years. It's not going to do any good. As a historian, what I'm trying to get you to do is understand the motivation for these things that have happened and how poorly we've discovered the history and how that's affected a people. Because this became, from the Board of Education, he did it because, I'll read you to the front part right here. Published by order of the Board of Education of the Hawaiian Islands, the schools asked him to create a textbook. Yes. This became the textbook for all territorial schools in Hawaii, private and public, for 40 years. If you went to school in Hawaii from 1899 to 1939, this was your school history textbook. If you were Hawaiian, telling you that your ancestors buried their kids alive. That's affecting a people. That's telling a people they're not competent. That's erasing a past, right? That's how you start to do it. That's our historiography. So from W.D. Alexander, we move on to, it's very necessary to have the work of this kind in the hands of the higher classes in our schools, they said. A standard authority and school textbook for more than 40 years. Not only was it a textbook in the schools of the territory of Hawaii, it was also the textbook at Leland Stanford University. Yeah. So Americans are learning this about Hawaiians as a textbook, right? Institutional narratives for the University of Hawaii. University of Hawaii is founded, I was doing research on John Henry Wise. I went back to the 1931 annual. There are school annuals like you get, or yearbooks like you get in high school. And the one at UH was called Palapala, Kapalapala. And the 1931 one had a history. It was kind of odd. It was set out as a history book, and the students' pictures were all in between. And there were different chapters. And the chapter on the overthrow was called The Transition. And it says in the UH yearbook, this period reveals the islands on the verge of dynamic changes. Queen Liliuokalani was on the throne and had ruled despotically, bringing about changes without consulting the will of her people. Revolution soon followed, and her throne was seized from her. That was the narrative from UH in 1931. That's how normalized it had become. As a historian, I can prove that wrong in 5 minutes with hundreds of sources. She was petitioned by her people, 9,000 signatures, demanding a new constitution. She was following the will of her people by putting forth a new constitution. She didn't go off on her own and do this. She even writes about in her book how it was a push from William White and Joseph Navahi who really made her understand this could happen. But yet that's the UH narrative in 1931 that every student takes home, gets their friends to sign, shows their mom and dad, and so forth. Now, I don't think it was purposeful. I don't think these editors were saying, oh, we'll sneak this by people. I think it talks to a understanding that, of course, the overthrow came, the white civilization came, the republic came, and then university and academia started. No. This was passed by the Queen. Here's the actual bill right here. Bureau of Agriculture and Forestry, an act relating to the Bureau Act, referred to printing committee and so forth, read the third time, and then approved this 4th day of January, AD 1893. It's right there in the English language press. That speaks to our historiography, our process of creating history today. Yeah, we've got to undo these approaches, these ways we're looking at our history. Institutional narratives, Bernice Pinauahi Bishop Museum, 1889 to present. A Bishop Museum, one of the foremost institutions in the Pacific. A wonderful academic place, put out many, many histories that are wonderful. One that I found very problematic, 1895, the so-called Wilcox Rebellion. There's talk about restoration of the Queen. The government is fearful. They're actually insecure. Small minority running a big country. There's a gentleman named Joe Uuku, who his uncle passes away in Wailuku, Maui. Joe is a student at the Kuhuna Kahonapula Okapakapika Akau, the North Pacific Missionary Institute, which was actually on the corner of Baratania and Punchbowl. It's where all the native pastors were trained to go into schools. And he's a student there under the Reverend Charles Hyde. Charles Hyde is also a board of trustee for Kamehameha Schools and Bishop Museum. And so he comes into Charles Hyde one day and he says, my uncle passed away and he's got all this weird stuff in the house. It was his stuff from Halinau'a, from Kalakawa's Halinau'a. And so he's got this stuff in the house. What should I do with it? And Hyde says, oh, bring it to me. And so he brings it to Hyde. Hyde gathers the stuff up, takes it to his friend Brigham, who's the curator of Bishop Museum, and they get together and they say, oh, I've got an idea. And they put the stuff together, they add some other kind of crazy looking stuff, and they make an exhibit that runs at Bishop Museum from 1895 to 1902. DeSoto helped me find photographs of it. It's really stirring. It's an exhibit that was in Polynesian Hall, which was the main hall, for 7 years, so every visitor came through and saw it. And it's not anthropological, it's not cultural, it's political. It's an exhibit that I'm going to show you, and it says, articles and artifacts used in praying for the restoration of the Queen. They're talking about Hawaiians who are praying for the Queen. Look at how crazy they are. It's got a bottle of bourbon, a bottle of gin, lonoapili. It's got all of this different stuff, shark hooks. And that was the exhibit's title. The actual card says, implements used in heathen worship in Honolulu, June 1895. That was an exhibit at Bishop Museum for 7 years, right? That's political. And now we're told this not to be political? These types of narratives helped the foreign community, helped all the American community, helped local communities understand about Hawaiians through those eyes. William Tufts Bigham, the curator, many of you know, was an avowed racist. I don't use the word lightly. You can pretty much say he hated Hawaiians. He was eventually fired by the Board of Trustees of Bishop Museum, to their credit, for being too racist. That's saying something when the trustees are firing you. He writes a letter on his way out to Dole, and he says, such things are to be expected of a board which has no deep regard for honor, decency, or the usual amenities of civilized life. God knows what I have to apologize for I, the head of a museum I have built up, so forth. And then he says at the end, I shall, under advice, probably sign the curious document under compulsion to avoid instant dismissal, but my work is done here, and I'm earnestly looking elsewhere for position in a white man's country. He was the first curator of Bishop Museum. He wrote a book called Stone Implements of Hawaii that's referred to constantly nowadays. That book tells a story about the stuff that Jo'u'uku brought in that's completely false. It says the family of this man, the mother, the wife and kids brought the stuff in because they were scared of this heathen, so forth. So again, historiography, where are we getting our sources? What are we doing as institutions to show off Hawaiian history? Hawaiian Historical Society, 1892 to present. Historical Society was established in 1892, private nonprofit organization created by a group of prominent citizens dedicated to the preserving of historical materials, presenting public lectures and publishing scholarly research on the history of Hawaii. Again, just like Bishop Museum, have done incredible work, I think, in my opinion. Talks, publications, Hawaiian Journal of History have done an incredible job over the last 100 years, but also part of that problematic historiography. The Hawaiian Historical Society, one of the first officers was W.D. Alexander, the gentleman who wrote this book. So the Historical Society in Hawaii is run by him, by President and Governor Sanford B. Dole. Now that's odd. Can you imagine the governor of Michigan running the Michigan Historical Society? Who was it? Churchill. Churchill had a great saying. He said, history will be kind to me, for I intend to write it. Right? You have the governor writing the history of Hawaii, Sanford Dole. You have W.D. Alexander. Oh, that's not Alexander. Emerson. And Nathaniel B. Emerson was one of the presidents. And you have U.S. Minister Sewell. The U.S. minister to Hawaii was the vice president of the Hawaiian Historical Society at a certain point, right? So these, and that's not, the contention is not these men are awful. It's that they have a side, right? And they're producing Hawaiian history. We like to, and I'll be really upfront with you. I say we is meaning my whole board. We like to, I try to shut it down whenever I can, but we like to promote the fact that the Queen was our first patron, our first matron. The Queen was the first matron of the Hawaiian Historical Society, which is a true fact. But when coupled with the context that they asked her in November of 1892 to be the matron, she agreed. They published their first report that came out with her picture on the inside cover. 2 months later, the overthrow happens. They republish the report, removing her cover and calling her the ex-queen. Yeah? There's a letter from the Polynesian Society, which was the sister society in New Zealand, and she's also the matron of that society. And the gentleman asks Hyde, what should we do about this? And he said, well, just make sure just remove her altogether. So that's part of our history also, is that removal of the queen's, of what happened from the society to the queen. Okay, so let's move on to some good news. So we have this history that's been created, it's been crafted. I tell my students all the time, I'm reminded myself all the time, we might pat ourselves on the back. I'm a really good researcher. I can go in and find a lot of stuff and so forth. We're constrained by what the museums and the collections and the archivists chose to collect, right? They didn't collect everything. I can tell you one thing they didn't collect a lot of, and that's women's voice, right? So we're already constrained by what was collected. So moving on to those untold stories and those stories that we are starting to now platform, many of us. The first one is Abigail Ku'ahelani Campbell, a patriot. This is her and her daughters here. Abigail Ku'ahelani Maipine Bright was born on August 22nd, 1858 in Lahaina, Maui. Yeah, Lahaina, Maui. She married John, or her father was John Maipine Bright, and her mother was Mary Kamai Hanaike. She married James Campbell at the beginning, and then Samuel Parker. Not a bad couple of choices. James Campbell from Campbell Estates and Samuel Parker from Parker Ranch. She had several kids. She became one of the founders of the Women's Huiloha Aina. Yeah? March 27th, 1893. The men had started their organization on March 14th. This wasn't just a women's branch. This was a whole separate organization. The women started the branch, the organization on March 27th, 1893. She was one of the initial founders. Actually, kind of another part of the untold story is there was a woman named Mrs. McFarland who was the first president, but only for a week or two. The body voted her out and voted in Mrs. Campbell soon afterwards. And the reason was they were preparing their first petition to Minister Stevens. And Mrs. McFarland and some of the women wanted to just write the petition saying, we want the return of our monarchy, right? And Mrs. Campbell and Mrs. Navahi and others said, no, 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 we want to be specific. We want the return of Queen Liliuokalani. Because there had been rumors that they would set her aside and bring in Iolani, that all kinds of things might happen. And they said, no, we want it in the petition, we want to bring back Queen Liliuokalani. And so Mrs. McFarland was voted out, and Mrs. Campbell became the new president of Hui Aloha Aina Women's. Yeah. Here's their Kumu Kanawai, their constitution. They published both in English and Hawaiian. Article 2 says, the object of this association is to help the propagation of patriotic sentiments tending toward the preservation to the independent autonomy of the islands of Hawaii. We want to remain independent. Article 4 says, all ladies of this country who are willing to pledge themselves to the object of this association are eligible for membership thereof and may become members by signing this constitution. Yeah. Hui Aloha Aina Wahine had over 11,000 members by the 1897s, 7,000 in the men's group. So the largest political organization in Hawaii, up until that point. I just learned this a few weeks ago. I didn't even know the real name, right? We have the names. What was the name of that association? It's in their constitution. Kahui Hawaii Aloha Aina o Ho'omau Ku'okoa Analeri. Yeah? The Women's Political Association pushing for preserving independence of the women. Yeah? The women are doing this. The women patriots pushing for independence. We, the women of Hawaiian Islands, for our families and the happiness of our homes, desire peace and political quiet, and we pray that man's greed for power and spoils should not be allowed to disturb the otherwise happy life of these islands, and that the revolutionary agitations and disturbances inaugurated here since 1887 by a few foreigners shall be forever suppressed. We just want peace. We want our nation back. This was the picture that many of you are familiar with. Yeah, this is just before their meeting with Minister Blount at the Hawaii Hotel in 1893. Many of you have seen this. This is from the San Francisco Call, a front page article that was actually 4 pages, a huge story in the San Francisco Call from September 30th, 1897. Miriam Michelson was a reporter sent here to investigate the annexation movement and what was going on. She visited an anti-annexation petition meeting in Hilo, the Salvation Army, and she wrote about it in the paper. Lynette Cruz and Kaleimaili Ali'i do a reenactment of that. They've done it hundreds of times. If you've seen it, it's incredibly moving. So this story, this is how much effect this story has, 100 and something years later, it's still being performed. But if you read it, it's eloquent and tear-jerking and pretty amazing. She quotes people at the meeting. She quotes a young girl who walks up and gives her a lei. And she says, what are you giving me a lei for? I can't do anything. And the little girl says, you can take our message back to the American people. Yeah? And they say, I don't have anything against America. I just don't want my nation stolen like they wouldn't like theirs stolen. Yeah? And they talk about how they're for the continued independence of their nation. Now, one of the untold stories of this, and a lot of this other things, when I used to teach Hawaiian Studies 10 years ago, it was all so sad. It's all such a bummer. Until you realize that what these ladies did, along with the men, in organizing that petition, in sending that petition to Washington, D.C., in publishing in the San Francisco Call, was affect public opinion in America. I wrote an article for the Hawaiian Journal of History about 8 or 10 years ago about college debates over annexation. Did you know from 1893 to 1896, there were college debates at all the major colleges in America about annexation of Hawaii? Georgetown, Columbia, Harvard, Yale. The first college debate on the west coast of the United States was the UC schools, which at the time was UC Berkeley and Hastings Law School, versus Stanford, which was 2 years old. In every case, the no annexation side won. And what they argued were 2 things. One was racist. One was we don't want to bring 100,000 brown people into our country. But the other argument they made was moral. They said, we can't do this. We're Americans. We're of the people, by the people, and for the people. How can we take a nation and we don't even let them vote about whether they want to be taken or not? Right? That narrative that in here and elsewhere affected those debates. It also affected the debates in Congress. And so the action of these women and others defeated a treaty of annexation in 1898. It takes a 2/3 vote to pass a treaty. That vote was defeated. Now we know there was kind of an end run around that with the Newlands Resolution, but the fact that we can argue about legality and not legality today comes from their success in stopping that treaty. So that work of Native Hawaiians at that time was successful. Mrs. Iolani Campbell, president of the Hawaiian Women's Patriotic League, here she is in the paper. Speaking of those who refuse to sign the government's oath of allegiance and lose their livelihoods, she says, think of it. Isn't it a great, wonderful sacrifice by a whole people for the sake of principle? Folks who signed the anti-annexation petition. And I can tell you there are hundreds and hundreds of stories of government employees who lost their jobs or walked away from their jobs instead of signing an oath of allegiance. I don't have time to go into them all tonight, but I'll tell you, we all know about the Royal Hawaiian Band. The Royal Hawaiian Band and Aipohaku, Kaulana Na Pua, the song, right? There were hundreds and hundreds of Hawaiians who did the same. There's a letter from 26 policemen in Honolulu saying, we will not serve this new government. On La Kuakoa, Independence Day in 1893, all the native firemen in Honolulu walked off their jobs. Yeah, there's a judge in Wailuku named William Henry Daniels who refused to sign, who lost his judgeship, lost his business, went bankrupt, and ended up taking his own life. So when we talk about sacrifice and we talk about these things that Hawaiians did for their nation, yeah, they're out there. We're just starting to hear those voices now. The 1896 petition to His Excellency Grover Cleveland, President of the United States of America. This letter was written by Mrs. Iolani Campbell. This letter and some other materials from Hui Aloha Aina are over at the Hawaiian Historical Society. We have what's called the Hui Aloha Aina collection. It's very small. We have very few things. This wasn't a government collection. It was a private group, so who knows where this stuff is. But this is one of the letters we have. She says to the President that the one hope and trust of the Hawaiian women is the same today as has been expressed in a petition heretofore presented. They entertain the firm belief that Your Excellency will do justice to this people before your term of office expires. That no cause whatsoever can arise that will alter or change the mind of the Hawaiian people and their desire to see monarchy restored and the throne occupied by Queen Liliuokalani. Signed, Mrs. James Campbell, President of the Hawaiian Women's Patriotic League. Yeah? They said, we're not going to change our minds. We know this to be. She held President Cleveland accountable. Now, many of you know, some may not. In December of 1894, President Cleveland gave an address in front of Congress, December 18th, and said, this is an act of war, what we've done. We're guilty. Any due regard for our national character means we must right this wrong. And he ordered his minister to restore the Queen. The minister came to Hawaii, told the Queen, agreed, made a deal with her. She signed the agreement. He went to the provisional government. He said, you guys got to back down. Dole and others were going to back down. He said, we lost. We've got promise from the Queen. We won't be arrested. We're all good. A faction of the provisional government, led by Thurston, said, no, I think they're bluffing. I don't think the U.S. government is going to fire on a bunch of white men to restore a brown queen. And he was right. President Cleveland didn't give the minister the power to use the military. He was hoping they would just back down, and they didn't. So there was a stalemate. And then Cleveland backed off and attended to other matters and passed it on to Congress, and nothing happened. So she's writing a year later saying, hey, you promised us. Yeah? Another thing that kind of gets at me is the fact of how much she adored her queen. She was hapai. She was pregnant at the time of the overthrow in January 1893. She gave birth on May 14th, 1893. These are from the Hawaiian Language newspapers. And she named her child, her last daughter, Royalist. Royalist Campbell. Yeah? Hey, inoa no, Royalist ke aloha li'i la'akapu Campbell. Royalist Campbell. She named her child Royalist. Unfortunately, her child would only live about 2.5 years. She died about 3 years later. If you go up to Nu'uano Cemetery, you'll see her headstone there. Oh, Oahu Cemetery, right. Thank you. Right there, Royalist Campbell. Royalist Madeline La'akapu Campbell. So here's a woman who had resources, who had status, who could have gone with the easy side, joined the new government and so forth, and she refused. She stood by her queen. She's a story that we all need to know. Mrs. Kahalivai Cummings. Mrs. Cummings is another patriot. She was the vice president of the Hui Aloha Aina Women's Group. Very high ali'i. She was hanaid at birth. Ooh, I'll get to that point here. She was born in Kona, Hawaii in 1834. She was hanaid by Kakao Onohi, yeah, the Kuhina Nui, and Charles Kana'ina. She was raised in that family. She was taught that status. She married John Adams Kuakini Cummins, who was the president, the honorary president of the men's group. So we rightfully so talk about these folks and like Joseph Navahi and his wife as heroes and so forth. That's wonderful. But I would argue here's even a more powerful couple, right? Mr. and Mrs. Cummins were the president and vice president of Hui Aloha Aina at the same time. They were making an effect. They were having those things brought to the people. She passed in 1902 in Honolulu. Her pallbearers included Princes Jonah Kuhio, Kaulana Na Ole, and David Kaulana Na Pua. So again, folks that you could arguably say we should know. We should know coming out of school. We should know these past Hawaiian heroes. Hi.
On your slide, you say Tula Kanai Naka by Kate Kuanoi. On your handout, you say Tula Kanai by Kate Kaulana.
Oh, it's this one. The handout's incorrect. Sorry. Yeah, Kekau Onohi was the proper one. So the handout is incorrect. Thank you for noting that. If you have a pencil, make sure to correct that. Thank you. Her son, Thomas Puali'i Cummins, was one of the men or boys sent on the mission of Kalakaua to send natives abroad to get a great education. He went to San Mateo to the military school. He's chosen as one of Mo'i Kalakaua's Haumana Kanakawiwi to take part in the Hawaiian Kingdom Study Abroad program in 1885. He was the classmate of Princes David Kavananakoa, Jonah Kuhio, Kaulana Na Ole, and Edward Keli'iahonui. So he was there in San Mateo, California. This photograph is actually in San Francisco. So this is one of her sons. She was a very, very well-known hostess. Her husband owned the sugar company out in Waimanalo and quite a bit of land out in Waimanalo from the father. Their place was called Mauna Loke, Rosemount. And here's a story from when Kalakaua came out there. It's a long history of that event and that luau that was thrown for Kalakaua there at her house. And this mele was written for her. Yeah? So she hosted those luaus, hosted those gatherings, brought those dignitaries and so forth, people together. Yeah? She was part of Hui Aloha Aina o Na Wahine, like I mentioned. That first meeting was at Arian Hall, across the street. Several hundred elders and children, right, of all classes. The objectives were to preserve the independence of our nation, our flag, and our independence. People from Waikiki, Palolo, Manoa, Makiki, all over the islands. Hundreds of signatures gathered at that petition table. So they were starting that petition as early as that. Now these are different petitions. People always ask, I thought that petition was 1897. There were several petitions that were done throughout that 5 or 6 years. Many folks, the petitions to the Queen in 1890 demanding a new constitution were something that were kind of almost lost to history. I forget her name. There was a Hawaiian language student at UH Manoa who rediscovered those about 10 years ago at the State Archives. So lots of petitions that were out there. So again, husband and wife power couple, right? She was the vice president of the Women's League. He was the honorary president of the Men's League. Now the honorary president is a position that kind of shifts in meaning. Under the Constitution of Hui Aloha Aina for men, the honorary president was a non-Hawaiian who was like a who could reach out to the non-Hawaiian community and so forth. But obviously, Mr. Cummins is Hawaiian, so somewhere along the line, that position kind of changed into kind of an ambassador to larger communities, which he did well. Petitions, Cummins helped organize a petition drive that gathered tens of thousands of signatures against a proposed annexation of Hawaii to the United States. These Ku'e petitions helped successfully defeat a treaty of annexation in 1898. So, what is the present kuleana of institutional preservers of Hawaii's past? So that's a quick, brief couple of examples. That's how Hawaiian history is, right? We've got all of these problems about materials from the past. And we all know it. We've all been talking about it for quite a while now. I talked to Helen or Nancy Morris quite a bit and others that have working in the papers for quite a bit. And we seem to make change at a glacial pace. I'm over at the State Archives now. I've dealt with Bishop Museum and other places before, so I'm just starting to get a feel for how these things work as what the fears are of archivists and so forth. When I propose something at a meeting over there, we don't change stuff, and I understand that. You don't go in and just willy-nilly, it can cause, people have been looking at this for 100 years and so forth. But my contention is we can do this. We can do this and we can do it right. And I'm going to show you a couple of proposals that I have for the museums, for the archives, for the library communities, and see if they sound radical or not. We have decades of research that highlights the problematic current historiography of Hawaii. So what do we do about it? Make active choices to expand the exclusionary narratives of the past. Make active choices. I talk to people all the time and say, oh, it's easier just not to get involved. It's scary. What if I make a decision? I don't know anything, I'm talking about average, I don't know anything about Hawaiian history. What if I make a mistake, and so forth? Start to make decisions that start that foundation. Yeah? At the archives, the state archives, one of the first things I did when I came in there as a temporary employee was pushed to have a Hawaiian language committee. And the director, Adam Jansen, is wonderful, the state archivist, and he said, sure. And we started this Hawaiian language committee. What does that mean? Nothing radical. It means we sit and talk about issues around Hawaiian language with our records. And so at one of the meetings we bring up, well, wouldn't it be incredible? We're putting everything online now. In August, we're launching a thing at the archives where we're putting up 500,000 documents and a whole brand new finding aid online. And so I said, well, when you talk about institutions like the Hawaii, every library, every museums association, most people around know that group of churches as what? 1863, that association's formed in Hawaii, the Hawaiian Evangelical Association. Hawaiian Evangelical Association. It's how it's listed at the Mission Children's everywhere. That's Hawaiian Evangelical Association. It's not that. Look at their constitution. Their constitution was put out in 1863 in Hawaiian, and it says our official language is Olelo Hawaii. They're producing English language reports for their bosses in Boston, but they're doing everything in Hawaiian. And their official language is Hawaiian. When they incorporate under Hawaiian Kingdom law as an institution, their incorporation papers say we are the Ahahui Wanaleo o Hawaii. So why do we now call them officially the Hawaiian Evangelical Association? Because it's easier? It doesn't make sense. So why doesn't the state archives call them the Wanaleo, the EAA, right, and then put the English too? Oh my gosh, people will get confused and da-da-da. That's what I heard. So I talked to the tech guy. We have a wonderful, brilliant tech guy. He said, no problem. We've been doing that for years. I can throw that into the finding aid. Somebody searches Wanaleo Hawaii, they'll get it. Somebody searches Hawaiian Evangelical Association, they'll get it. It doesn't cause problems. It's just a matter of being active and doing that, choosing to do that, right? So these corporations, these entities that were founded in the 19th century under the Hawaiian Kingdom law in Hawaiian, we're using English names because it's easier for us. But it's hurting the awareness of what these institutions actually were. That was a Hawaiian institution, yeah? So, another problem. We know that the elision of native language of Hawaii has greatly affected our understandings of Hawaiian history. How do we do that? Form a permanent Hawaiian language committee within our institutions that actively looks for workable ways to lay the groundwork for a more inclusive historical narrative. All of us should form Hawaiian language committees that start to look at, however you think is workable, yeah, to start to make effects in our past narrative. It's very easy to do. We came up with lots of ideas. Where we say king, we'll also put mo'i. What does that do? That means that Auntie from Longs, when she comes into the Hawaii State Archives and she opens up our finding aid, she sees mo'i. She goes, oh, wow, that's the Hawaiian word for king. Oh. And she starts to understand the records she's looking at better. These are records under a Hawaiian nation in Hawaiian language. So you're raising awareness in these tiny ways. So what can we do? Commit to valuing Hawaiian language as a necessary tool in the fulfillment of our missions. Yeah? What is our mission at the Hawaiian Historical Society? Our mission is to preserve, protect, and disseminate Hawaiian history. We're putting out publications, and we're putting out things about Hawaiian history. We need to take into consideration how we can do that, including Hawaiian Voice. That's our responsibility. That's part of our mission. And I would argue it's part of all of our missions. So what stories do we leave for our mo'opuna to use and to understand their world? To understand their world, right? In the 1900s, 1940, Hawaiians got to understand their world through this book, right? Things have changed somewhat, but we're still very much in need of giving our mo'opuna resources to understand their world through their ancestors' eyes. Yeah? And that's doable. It's a matter of listening to their voices. They spoke prolifically about their love of their land, their lives, and their lahui. And it's just long past time we listened. Yeah? So, mahalo. Mahalo. Yes, Jeanette.
Thank you, Ron. Can you hear me? Okay. This is one of the best lectures I've heard in a long time.
Oh, mahalo.
It speaks to me directly because, as you know, I'm a deep researcher and a writer and so forth. So I've been having to address these issues for many years when I'm studying a topic, and I'm saying, is this right or is this right? Is this right? And I try to get confirmation from various sources, but like you say, and I found this continually, the repeating of the same fake news.
Right.
Over and over and over for generations.
Right.
It's prevalent
Right.
out there.
And people think they heard a lot, so it's true.
Yeah. I wish I had brought this piece of paper. A few days ago, I gave a walking tour at Oahu Cemetery for the docents here. And several of you were on my tour. And we stopped at, right now, where were we at? I'm talking about the overthrow. I'm at Thurston's grave. And I read a letter from the Committee of 13, collectively, to Minister Stevens, United States Minister Stevens, a long letter, several paragraphs, saying, "You must help us. We are in fear of our lives." I'm kind of paraphrasing, but the natives are arming themselves as we speak. You must help us protect our lives are at stake here. And it went on for several paragraphs. But then, so that goes to minutes, and that becomes the record. That's what happened in American history books and many history books. But when you go into a Native Hawaiian language newspapers and you look at what were Hawaiians reporting of what happened on that day, it was a peaceful Sunday, and there was no rebellion brewing. The Queen had not called out anybody preparing, get your rifles, anything like that.
Right.
And so it's really aggravating that those narratives get repeated and repeated and repeated.
Yeah, mahalo. Mahalo. Thank you. And I'll add on to that. So, and it's not that you're always finding the story you're looking for. I don't do history to be pro-Hawaiian. I do history because I want to bring the story back to the people. When I went to do my dissertation, I mentioned, I'm not Christian, to be honest with you. I'm actually an atheist. But I went into the story to prove how Christianity had been this awful thing that brainwashed Hawaiians. That's what I'd been taught all my life. And so I went in to do that story. And I went into the newspapers, and immediately I found out I was wrong. And I spent 10 years reading their words, prolific words, on the church. And I found out that the Christian church was actually one of the central tools that Hawaiians used to fight for the restoration of the Queen and against annexation. The day after the overthrow of the Queen, on January 18th, there are prayer fast meetings in the churches throughout the islands. And they're claiming God. They're saying, we're better Christians than you guys are. We know what, and there's these prolific rants in the newspaper about these sons of the mission, and they thank Binamu guys. They say, thank you, Brigham, and you guys for bringing the gospel to us. Your sons and grandsons have become apostates. Right? So Hawaiians confidently challenge that and claim God and use it to fight for their nation. Now, I'm not promoting Christianity, but I'm saying they were Christian and they were no less Hawaiian. Yeah? So that story was a story I found that I didn't really want to find. But that's what the Hawaiian language newspapers do for you. They bring out the voice. Yeah? So thank you. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Is there any recent history that has been written that gives both sides?
Yes, ma'am. Good question.
The story.
That's a question I get quite a bit, and I'm finally I can say that some. Most of us are working on stuff, so hopefully we'll see stuff coming out. One great book that I like a lot is Maria Lohalani Brown's biography of John Papa'i'i. In my opinion, that's the first complete, whole, well-done biography of a Native Hawaiian leader done from both sides of the story. She doesn't glorify him. She went through every minute of every Privy Council meeting, every Hawaiian language document, every English language document she could find, and she wrote the story of John Papa'i'i. It's called Facing the Spears of Change. And it's a really brilliant book. And that's, for me, a model of how we should be doing Hawaiian history, is saying, here's what the people said about him, here's the resources, here's his story. So that's a book that I recommend everybody read, and that I think is a model for all of us. Now, but think about that. So I was talking with somebody the other day, David Forbes, yesterday. Wait, oh yeah. There's, in my opinion, and I'm a little nervous to say this, but I don't think there's a decent biography of a Hawaiian leader outside of EE that's out there. And I don't mean to disparage the work that's been done in the past. They worked with what they had to do and with the tools that they had, and but there's so much more behind these people. I'll give you another example. I just mentioned David, and he's a brilliant friend of mine, but also has that puka of missing Hawaiian language, right? So for me, the new Queen's book has a problem. The Queen's Trust just put out a new version of Hawaii Story by Hawaii's Queen.
A third one?
No. Well, relatively new, 10 years, 8 years. There's a relatively new history of the Queen, or history of Hawaii Story by Hawaii's Queen. What they had David do was to go back and, which I love, there's a book about the Queen Emma's letters to Kalaupapa by Korn that I love, because he tells you who all these people are. And David did the same thing. He went through and told everybody the Queen mentions, here's who they are, there's little bios. And that's really helpful, but he's telling you who they are from the English language sources. And kalamai, but I know those folks in a different way. What were Hawaiians saying about those folks? So it's not that it's wrong, it's that you're getting part of the story. So until we start to do those biographies and do those projects, demanding that the Hawaiian language materials and Hawaiian language voices be included, we're not going to get the story. Yeah. But it's coming. It's coming. Yes?
About 2 years ago, the University of Hawaii, I'm not sure if I'm saying this right, Department of Curriculum and Development, they have been publishing textbooks, Hawaiian history textbooks. So 2 years ago, they came out after 10 years of not writing a book, a new book on the history of Hawaii. So have you seen that, and can you comment on that? It's evolved.
Right. To be honest, I can't comment on it because I haven't seen it well. I've just glanced at it. I can comment on something related, and that is the DOE. As much as I've whined tonight, we are making headway. The DOE is rewriting 4th, 7th, and 9th grade standards. They have been doing it for some reason. The feds want to change the standards every 10 years. So they just did Common Core. Now they're doing a new thing called C3. But what it gave us was the opportunity to bring folks in there. The woman who runs the Hawaiian Immersion Program and myself were a couple of the Hawaiian history content people on the project. And so I'll give you an example. In 4th grade, so my first question was, why do Hawaiians get history in 4th, 7th, and 9th grade only? And they said, well, because they have to learn American history too. And I said, well, you can teach American history through the lens of Hawaii. You can talk about sugar in the Civil War and stuff like that, but anyway, here you get history in 4th, 7th, and 9th grade for Hawaiian history. 4th grade is the birth of the islands. So what they had was the geology of the islands, volcanism, da-da-da-da-da-da. So I said, well, what about Papa and Wakea? Oh, no, that's literature. Like, no, that's the birth of the islands to the native people. And we were able to get that into the 4th grade curriculum. So the new standards for 4th grade in public schools is going to be Papa and Wakea and the geology and volcanism and so forth. So folks, I believe that folks want to make a difference and want to change. Across the street at the Hawaiian Judiciary, the Kamehameha 5th Judiciary Center, I'm behind, but I've been working on a project with them for a few years now to rewrite their entire master narrative from Hawaiian language sources. So the history of the Hawaiian judiciary from Hawaiian language sources, they'll use that master narrative to create programming, curriculum for schools, and else things. So and there's lots and lots of other folks working on stuff like this too. So we're making a difference. We need momentum and support. Yeah. Okay. What else? Question? Yeah.
So are there a lot of people working and cleaning up what's on the internet as well?
That's something I don't go near. You know, I'm glad some folks do, but my recommendation to all my students, my demand to my students, and my recommendation to everyone else is don't look at Wikipedia. Because it's Hawaiian history on Wikipedia is 90% wrong. And what Wikipedia is people fighting over who can get it up next. So you'll never get a stable history. People just go back and forth and go back and forth. Now there's a project. I was asked to write a piece for the Oxford Encyclopedia of Religion in America. Oxford puts out a master encyclopedia of this topic or that topic every 20 years. And so what they're doing with this new one is making it online. So they're creating kind of an online Wikipedia written by professional historians and cited, checked, and fact-checked, and peer-reviewed and so forth. Problem is, it's costs. They sell that to universities and so forth, right? But it's a start. It's a fact-checked Wikipedia, right? So those researchers are starting to come out. It's just who gets them, right? But it's the internet. I'll tell you a quick story. I've been writing for Hanaho magazine for quite a while, maybe 10, 12 years. I wrote a story about 5 or 6 years ago about Joseph Navahi, and this is just to the state of how Hawaiian history is done. So I wrote a story about Joseph Navahi, who I'd researched quite a bit prior to this. And so I wrote about his painting that was bought at the thrift store for $400 and turned into a $400,000 painting. So it was a painting of Hilo Bay, and I don't remember the date. I'll say 1887. So I write in my draft, and my editor, I work with the same editor all the time, love him. We go back and forth, and da-da-da. He doesn't usually fact-check my history, but whatever. So he writes the thing back to me, and he marks stuff in red where he's changing. So he sends the last draft back to me, and I'm reading it. It says, the Joseph Navahi painting of 1883, blah, blah. I'm like, no, it's 87, isn't it? And I went back and checked my record. It's 87, yeah. But it wasn't red, so I figured it was my mistake, right? So I wrote him back, and I said, hey, the date on the Navahi thing is wrong. I put 83, and it's actually 87. And he goes, no, I changed that. And I said, you changed that? I go, what'd you change that for? He goes, because it says 1887 right on Wikipedia. So, when you have editors at major magazines fact-checking writers with Wikipedia, that's right. And he's usually wonderful. He was a late night probably or something like that. But that's the state of Hawaiian history today, right? Is that we don't know who to trust. We'll trust the voices. Yeah. Okay.
So can you say, what are the layman schools learning about Hawaii?
That's even scarier. Yeah, that's a problem. But and I always try to look at the bright side. There are Hawaiians and others out there at universities making a difference. There's folks in Washington. There's folks in Colorado. There's a whole Polynesian Studies program at University of Utah now, University of Washington. There are folks out there from Hawaii who are making a difference in that larger community. Iolani Arista is the professor of history at UH Manoa. She very much sees herself as she's an incredible historian, and she's bringing that out to a larger audience. Some of us are working here in a local audience. She does the local thing, but also works in the national audience. So people like her and others are changing that narrative in a world sense. Yeah. Hi.
Hi, this is a personal question.
Sure.
I read your post on Facebook.
Oh,
and
thank you.
So every day you put something totally intriguing up, and I really want to go back and look at that or find it or whatever, and I just want to run over to the archives and go, hey, I want to see this. So I just want to tell you that I appreciate the things that you put up and the fact that we're able to read those and learn more. The day that you put up the Queen's Diary, and then also on the total other spectrum, Captain Cook's Glass or whatever, I'm sitting at home and I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is so cool.
People like history.
So I'm just saying that if you see some of us running over to the archives after you put something up, that's the reason.
I know my boss hates me. He's like, everybody's gonna come and want to see it now. But thank you so much for saying that. It is the reason why I do the work. I'm a firm believer in public histories. Some of us, I say us meaning academics, some of the motivations are to be on some panel at Yale as known as the best historian in the country and write a book every 20 years. But for me, and this comes from my training. My training was at Kamakaku'ukalani. Haunani K was my mentor. Lili Kalakame Ilahiva beat into us, not literally, beat into us every day that you do this for the Lahui. That's why you're here. So it doesn't help, that information if I know it, so what? Getting it out to the people is important, so I appreciate that. Yeah.
Hello, Ron.
Hello.
Mahalo for everything. And this is another personal question, by the way.
Uh-oh.
But I guess how long have you been doing what you do? And I guess if there's some great lessons that you've learned on the journey from maybe someone who's wanting to be a historian and a researcher as well. Yeah.
Awesome. So thank you for the question. a couple things. What I'll say, I'm working on a story right now about a former professor of mine, Kanalu Young. I'm writing about him for Hanaho, and it's very difficult. He was my MA thesis committee advisor. He was quadriplegic. He was one of the founding professors at UH Manoa at Hawaiian Studies, and he passed a few months after my thesis. I'll never forget what he did for me, and that was give me the confidence to do real history, not the history we want to do. Be very careful. Sometimes, I'll be blunt, sometimes when I say our, I mean all of us doing Hawaiian history. Sometimes one of our faults is to want to tell the story that's going to make the best impact, or tell the story we want to hear. Kanalu said, no, the story's good enough. Tell the history. Let them lie, let them move it around. Let's us tell the story. And so that's what I think I would say to everyone. I've seen some students, and in general we're doing that. I've seen some students feel like they had to I've seen the work come and be, here's the story that makes Hawaiians look awesome. Let's tell the story, right? And so Kanalu was about that. My work is about that, and he gave me the confidence to do that. To back up a little bit, I was at the Friends of Moku'ula, and I was working at a luau, the feast at Lele. I had a 4-year-old daughter, and the girls used to watch her, the dancers used to watch her while I worked, and then she hung out. But I realized one day I couldn't do that forever. It was a great job. Wear a lava slippers, watch the sunset every night, eat pohole fern, poi, drink beers, make good money. But I knew I couldn't do it forever, right? So I went back to college, and Keopi Raymond was my first kumu. And he showed a film in class one day of this brilliant woman who was passionate and fearless and dynamic. And I was like, wow, that's what I want to do, and that's who I want to study under. And that was Haunani K. Trask. So she, Kalamai. So she's really the reason I went into this. So I took a Rainbow Bridge program, and Kalamai for getting emotional, but she's not doing well health-wise right now. But I took the Rainbow Bridge brought University of Hawaii Maui Community College students over to UH Manoa, and I came over on the bus, the flight and then the bus, and we were touring the campus. And you stop off, the bus stops at every department: economics, business, science, math, and Hawaiian Studies is the last stop. And there's 100 people on the bus, and they're all getting off, and they're all getting off, and they're all getting off. And the last stop, there's like 17 Hawaiians and me. They're looking at me like, bro, you missed your stop. And I'm like, no, I'm really coming down here. And so I was scared to death, come on, let's be honest. And I took Haunani K's class, and the first day of class, I'll never forget it, more so than scared, I was also niele. I like to learn things. The first day of class, she talks, I'm like, oh my God. Like everything she said, you wanted to write down. And it wasn't that you agreed with everything she said, but she made you think. I never left a class of hers without thinking about it for like 2 hours afterwards. So I want to ask her a question, so I go walking up to her, and this big Hawaiian guy comes up, and they hug, and they go off. I'm like, oh, man, I missed my chance. So I go outside, and I sit down, and I'm in the quad there, and I watch her, and she goes over into her office. About an hour later, she gets out of her office, she comes over, and she starts walking towards me. I'm like, oh, crap. And she comes up, and she said, I'm sorry. She goes, did you have a question? She goes, that was my cousin. I haven't seen him forever, but I saw you had a question. That's how she was. She was all about her students. So for some reason, she took me under her wing and got me through college. She really did. There's lots of other personal stories I won't share. I went through a divorce. I was a single dad. She told me I'm coming to grad school. I said, I was on Maui with my daughter, and I said, I was literally living in a tent, working back at the luau, and I said, I can't come back to college. And she said, come, I'll take care of it. And she found me a tuition waiver for 4 semesters in a row. She got me through college. So like the reason I'm doing what I'm doing is not out of repayment or anything. For me, it's about humanity. It's about there's a wrong done. What can I do to see justice in that? When I go out to the community, when I go out to Puna or I go out to Lahaina or I go somewhere and I talk and Puna come up to you afterwards and say, thank you for that story. That's why I do it. I'm able to do it. I could never have done this myself. I'm not really that smart. I work hard. I'm able to do it because of kumu like Haunani K and others. So Noinoi Silva, Haunani K, and others gave me the kuleana to do what I do. So it's a long-winded answer, but mahalo.
Okay. I know you have a question. Sorry, I'm just going to have one more question.
Yeah.
So do you think there's going to be a lot more, programs, since we're deeping more into the Nupepa, like more programs or occupations made for Olelo Hawaii speakers, since we're kind of going into that direction to fix the historiography?
You mean programs as far as like academic or?
Academic, yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Hawaii Nui Akea is now the largest indigenous studies program in the world, and growing. When they did, now you can like this or dislike this, but the point is, when they did budget cuts at UH recently, and they're talking about going broke, and they did a across-the-board 20% reduction, Hawaii Nui Akea was exempted. Because the university, in their mission statement, says they are a Hawaiian place of learning, which is, but at least they today are saying we should start heading there. So that's where we're headed. That's where you can't hide anymore. People are being called out. I want to make a really important point too, and that is there's place in Maimana'o. This is only Maimana'o. There's place in history for those who don't speak Hawaiian, for Hawaiian history. Stacy Kamahiro is a professor at UC Santa Cruz. She wrote a book called Kalakaua and the Art of Kingship. Brilliant book. I learned so much about the art of Kalakaua. She doesn't speak any Hawaiian. She didn't access any Hawaiian language sources, which is a puka in her book, but she admits that. She says, I'm going to tell you the story of Kalakaua's art from the foreign community and so forth, which is important. So I learned a ton. If I want to, I'll go and get that other story. So there's a place for folks who don't speak Hawaiian to do Hawaiian history. It's just we have to know what we're going and how we present what we're doing. Yeah? So yeah, I see it as an incredibly growing field. Yeah, mahalo.
Yeah, mahalo. Okay, I don't want to hold the mic too long, but if you have a couple minutes, I kind of want to talk to you afterwards too.
Oh,
But
sure.
I'm going to pass it on to Brad over here.
Sure.
Ron, hi. Just a couple of questions.
Yes, sir.
One, who were you going to, which people will you be talking about in Waianae? And
Oh,
also-
Waianae.
And also in Hilo, you just went to Hilo, right?
Yeah.
Who did you choose to speak to about that?
Well, in Waianae, we're going to talk about Waianae folks. So we're going to talk about so I'll give you an example. There's, and it's imperative that we understand that this isn't any of our faults. That kupuna, that Hawaiian woman who's got 3 kids and working 2 jobs and so forth, she's supposed to go do history too? That's my job, right? So but the point is, we as a community don't know those heroes. So when I go to Kauai, I went out to Waianae, to the college recently, and I say, so who are the Hui Aloha Aina representatives from Waianae? Nobody knows. Nobody knows any of them. And these are the folks that represented your community, fought for your nation. So we bring those folks back and say, here's who they are. They're buried over there. And folks take it up on their own and go and clean up that grave and take care of that grave. And so it starts that community connection to those heroes. So in Waianae, we'll talk about the Waianae heroes. In Puna, I'm speaking on Puna this weekend, and we're going to talk about the church stuff, the dissertation stuff. Yeah.
Another question. Since you're doing, not just you, but many now are doing, I'll call it the new Hawaiian history that is going back to the real sources, and I suppose that amounts to correcting Hawaiian history. Most historians I'm aware of like to stand out in the sense that they want to do their original stuff. It's only them doing it, and therefore, with some kind help from people who urge them along, publish it, and then they take the criticism like this. Are you folks basically sharing this story, actually the details of the story, with yourselves before you put it out?
That's not what I do. And again, it's a difficult topic to discuss because it's not. I don't want to sound Ho'okano or like, but everything I research, my goal is to get it out to the community. I'll write a book along the way, but I don't want to wait 7 years. And I don't want to, every story I've ever told, there are ohana of that person I'm talking about alive. So you get that story to the ohana, it's their story. I'll give you an example. It's different training. And some folks do. Some folks want to, I've been warned 100 times, like, somebody's going to steal your idea and write your book. I don't care. Then write it. I'll write a different one. When I was in Hawaiian Studies, everything's done for the Lahui. Everything's done for the Lahui. Everything's done for the Lahui. I go to the PhD program in the history department, and I'd been writing already quite a bit, publishing and things like that. And so they had a publishing meeting. And so I go in there, and the chair of the department in the history department says, okay, so these are places you want to publish, and these are places you don't ever want to publish. And the top of them don't ever publish was magazines. And I'd written a lot of articles for Hana Ho. And I was like, oh crap, what did I do, you know? What did I do? And I said, why? I said, why am I not supposed to write for magazines? And he said, because you run the risk of becoming known as a popular historian, not an academic historian. And so I write, and my belief is that you can do both.
Yeah.
I mean, I just wrote for Oxford Press, and I can write for Hana Ho. And the difference is that Hana Ho magazine goes on every plane they fly across the world for two months. You're talking about an audience of 1.5 million people. So when I get emails from Colorado or some Anthea, like, I don't get that when I write a journal article. but so you can do both. But some folks don't think you can, and so forth. But there's a lot of folks like me. There's a lot of folks that are doing that public history.
I'll say a lot of historians will share their story with other historians, like to, I don't know, get input on the story before they publish it. They you know,
You mean like critique and stuff like that?
It's my story.
I think that, to be honest, I think you're right, but I think it's less so in Hawaiian history. Most of Noe Silva, the folks I work with, they're not holding their stuff in secret. A couple are, but most aren't. Most understand the value of it to the community. Yeah, that's why it's a great field to work in. Yes, ma'am.
You kind of mentioned the University of Hawaii School of Hawaiian Studies.
Mm-hmm.
Are they encouraging them to write on their thesis, the history of Hawaii? Because I think, and have it published. The other thing I know in thesis is kind of a lot of too highfalutin words that are they encouraging them to write it for the public, sort of?
That's a good question. In the past, so who you have to please is the press, is UH Press, is your publisher. Lilikala and Kaunenike and John and those folks always told me, write stories. But you want a job as a teacher, you've got to publish, and it's got to be an academic press. In the past, that had been, so write really smart, sound like you're smart, and have nobody understand it. But they're changing. They're changing. When the meeting I had with them about my book, they said, we want a readable book. We want a readable, and I can guarantee you, I don't know if it's going to get published or not, but my manuscript for my book is going to be for the community. It's going to be a readable book.
A lot of them are not too many, but some of them are getting their doctorates and masters.
Mm-hmm.
Don't they have to write a thesis?
They do, but that's nobody reads your thesis. But that turns into several projects and a book that you hopefully will make readable. But yeah, I'll never do that again. But I mean, to try to answer your question, yes, we're encouraged by Hawaiian Studies especially, but most departments, to make the work valuable, to make the work valuable and to make it readable.
It's always been an issue that who writes history has an agenda, and here in Hawaii you see it very clearly. And it looks like discovering the Hawaiian sources is a job of a couple of lifetimes. But I do wonder how much of it has been looked at, so how much more is out there. And secondly, have you looked past Hawaii for sources outside of the U.S.? And what kind of imagery do you get from those? What kind of read do you get? Are they just copying American think? Or are, for instance, European ethnographers looking at it completely differently?
Great questions. So first of all, we've touched the tip of the iceberg. I would estimate we've gone through, and I say we, meaning all of us together doing Hawaiian language research, have touched 1%. There's 125,000 pages of Hawaiian language newspaper now digitized. And we've gone through, maybe 20% of it. There are tens of thousands. The newspapers get a lot of press, but there are tens of thousands of documents and letters. And so I'm at the archives going through stuff. When you don't normally think, like 1894, the sheriffs of all the islands are writing into the government. Did you know they're writing in Hawaiian? Even the Haole sheriffs, right? So all those records are in Hawaiian. We haven't read those yet. So there's tons and tons of stuff out there that we haven't read in Hawaiian. That's why equipping students with that language is important. There's the immersion school program. My daughter was in the immersion school for 10 years. Those are the kids I'm excited about. She corrects my Hawaiian all the time. I still translate in my head, right? She's had it as their central language for 10 years. Those kids are going to do amazing work. So yeah, we've got a ton of stuff ahead of us. The question about the other archives, yes, very much so. There's a ton, you wouldn't believe, well, I'll give you a simple fact. In 1887, there were close to 100 Hawaiian Kingdom consulates and embassies around the world. Spain, New England, Seattle, all these places. Those are places where documents were kept, right? I was visiting Harvard a few years ago doing research there, and I drove up because I had time to Williams College, because I know some of the missionary guys went to Williams College. Stopped in. There's a whole collection of I forget his last name. Anyway, there's a whole collection of papers there that are central to Hawaiian history. They're all over the world. As far as different views, yes. Incredible, and this is, I'm going to have to make some generalizations, but there's a huge shift in view between America and the rest of the world. If you read the sources from England, from South America, from other places, they're very, very different. One of them was monarchy, right? Americans were inherently anti-monarchy. The British weren't. So stuff the British were saying about the Hawaiians is quite different. Whenever anybody toured, they got a much different reception in America than they did other places. But that's not. But I also feel, and this is an important point to make, we jump on that bandwagon too easily of generalizing America, right? The article about that I wrote about the schools wasn't the only thing. There was a huge anti-imperialist movement in America at that time. Lots and lots of Americans felt differently. So yeah, it's important to gather as much of that different scope as you can. And again, that stuff, a lot of that stuff's at the archives. There's those embassies and consulates sent all their books back here. We're doing the governor of Hawaii called us a few weeks ago in a panic, and they're going to do 100. I should be careful. It's on camera. They want to do a 150th anniversary of the first Japanese to arrive in Hawaii, 1868. It's going to be a huge deal. So, what records do we have? We've got the original labor contract from this American who was serving as the Hawaiian Kingdom consulate in Japan from 1868, and he contracts 138 Japanese workers to come to Hawaii. Doesn't go well. They're not treated very well. The Japanese embassy files a complaint, all that stuff. Yeah. So lots of different views about sugar and planting and economics and all these things. I used to say it's true, and it's totally true. Pick a topic, throw a dart at it. You can do a dissertation that no one's ever done.
So I'm just wondering,
Yes.
If you have a feeling with all of the work that you're doing to unearth, say, the secret history of Hawaii, if the work that you're doing might have a role to play or might contribute, say, 5, 10, 50, 100 years in the future to somewhat of a repatriation of Hawaii and the Hawaiian Islands?
Okay, good question. First of all, I want to go back a couple of questions ago, and just I meant to say something I didn't, and I know it was not spoken in this manner, but the question was that we're getting to Hawaiian language sources and the real history now. I want to be careful and be clear that Hawaiian language sources aren't the real history. They're a history that hasn't been included, right? We forget that there were Hawaiian language newspapers that were pro-annexation. Kanu Pipakuakoa, the largest Hawaiian language newspaper in the islands, was ardently pro-American and pro-annexation. So Hawaiian language sources don't tell the other story, they tell a wider story. So that's an important point to make, okay? To this question, I think about that, but to be honest, that's not I try not to concern myself with that. I'm not saying that I don't want my work to have an effect on that category. But what I am saying is my concern is the effect that it has on communities and families today. And because I can see, and it's a little, maybe it's selfish, but when you think about Hawaiian kids today and how they feel about themselves, how they feel about their communities, how they feel about their ancestors, and you can make a difference in that, that's an important mission, I think. When you can, we've done talks at a lot of churches and stuff like that. And there was a talk one time when an elderly woman stood up and said, I can pass now. I know the story of my kupuna and so forth. A political agenda past that, okay, maybe, hopefully, but yeah. Oh yeah. Well, and not only my work is, is a tiny, tiny drop in the bucket of folks that are out there doing a lot more active work in that category. That yeah, I mean, there's these questions that we're asking now. When I teach, I taught the honors class of Hawaiian Studies 107, and 10 years ago I used to say to people, Treaty of Annexation, what happened? Huh? Now my students come in, they're like, oh, that had this and this and this, and they cite sources and so forth. So that the political understanding of the status of Hawaii is changing, and that's all because of work of many folks. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, this is kind of a fun question, but what are some major projects you're working on now that you're kind of excited about, and I guess any major projects you kind of want to see in the future? Yeah.
Okay. Well, my second book is a book that I'm really, really excited about, and that is a true story of a Native Hawaiian sailor from the 1840s who does whaling, is on whaling ships, ends up going to San Francisco for the gold rush. In 1862, he's arrested on the docks of San Francisco for murder. They say that he was the man who killed a ship captain in Micronesia and stole the purse. Killed 2 people aboard the ship and stole the purse. And one of the crew members sees him in San Francisco and says, that's the guy, because he's brown, right? And so he's arrested and put in San Francisco prison. It's a remarkable story because, so I had to do a lot of research on California history at the time. So this is during the American Civil War. California became a state in 1950. The 1951 legislature passed a law mandating that no brown man can testify in court against a white man. 1850, I'm sorry, 1850. No brown man can testify in court against a white man. That was state of California. It was still going in the 1860s. So he's dust, right? He's a brown guy in prison, accused of murder of two white guys. He's dust. But Reverend Gulick, who's in San Francisco raising money for his mission to Micronesia, hears about it in the paper, goes and visits him in jail, talks to him, and the guy says, I didn't do it. I was living in Honolulu at the time. People. So he takes that testimony to the Hawaiian Kingdom Consulate in San Francisco, which there is, right? The Hawaiian Kingdom representative in San Francisco writes a letter to the Privy Council. The king, Lot Kapuiva, gets the letter and says, wow, one of my subjects is in prison charged with murder. I need to help him. But he doesn't just automatically help him because he's Hawaiian. He writes a list of questions for the guy to prove that he's telling the truth. And so this correspondence goes back and forth. Once the king is convinced that he's innocent, he sets aside $1,000 in 1862, a ton of money, to put together a commission to go help this guy. John Papa'i'i, Kekuana Oa, and others. They travel to San Francisco. They go meet with him. One of the guys knows his father. They're convinced he's innocent. They go to trial. They're allowed to testify in court. John Papa'i'i testifies in court in San Francisco, the federal court, superseding state law because the United States has a treaty with the Kingdom of Hawaii. And that treaty overturns that. Now, what American alive today do you think knows that there was a treaty between the Hawaiian Kingdom and the United States that allowed brown men to testify in court in San Francisco during the Civil War, right? So I traveled to San Francisco. I found all the original court records. The stories I tell always come to me. I don't go fishing, and I don't mean to sound whatever, but it's like there's a million stories out there, and you end up knowing which one to do. I was in San Francisco looking for those records, and they told me they're gone. They're burned. The San Francisco fire. And so I looked for weeks, couldn't find anything. On the way out, the National Archives is in San Bruno. So I stopped by the National Archives to do stuff on Chiang Kai-shek and others, and I found them there. And the guy told me in the 1870s, some of the records were sent up to Sacramento so they escaped the fire. So those things come together, and you're like, this is the story. So that story, yeah, Heleiki.
How do you spell that?
H-E-L, you're not going to write my book, are you? No. H-E-L-E-I-K-I. And I came across it because it was in the Hawaiian language newspapers. Real quick, so the other one is the 1895 rebellion, the Wilcox Rebellion. We don't know anything about that. And we've got the arrest records, we've got photographs, we've got everything for the Wilcox Rebellion. So that's the other one. Stories I want to see done. There's a book at Hawaiian mission houses that's about that thick, and it has every single land deed and transaction about church property in Hawaii. Lots and lots of letters about, well, we don't really own this property, but how are we going to do this and this and this and this? So some student needs to go in there and figure out all the property. Chinese voice, Japanese voice. I would love to see somebody go in and start to tell us what they were saying and doing. So there's a lot, and there's a million projects. Yeah, but thank you for the question.
All right, folks.
Thank you so much, folks, for coming. Yeah.